Morning, Joanne. Rico Kotse here. Listen, Flamulo just phoned me now. He said you had
Yes,
some issues with regard to projecting. Can you
yes.
check if you are able to? I'll give you co-hosting rights now.
The problem, I tell you what the problem is. The problem is our
Huh.
fiber is down. So,
Oh,
yeah, so I'm having to use my phone as a hotspot to connect.
hotspot.
And that means that the
Okay.
bandwidth is going to be a problem, which is why, look,
Okay.
Rudy Dix may also be able to flight. So when Rudy
Okay.
comes, we can check. Okay.
Sure. Okay.
All right.
That's fine. Thanks,
Okay.
Joanne. All
All
right.
right.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Thanks. Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Good morning, honorable members and officials and our guests.
Morning, Chair.
Morning, Secretary. I can see that we are 38, meaning that we are correcting, ne?
We do form a quorum, yes, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me welcome everybody in the meeting and officially open the meeting. And I would love to welcome the guests, the one who are going to present for us. And during this month of November, the time of the 16 days of activism, I don't want to talk too much. We all know what is expected during this month, especially as women, but even as men, because we need women and men to hold hands together and assist one another in the GBV. I'm not going to do a long speeches as I used to do, but let's soldier on as women and fight this GBV. And let's not throw the towel, but try our level best to be as good as much. We understand that sometimes there are challenges of killing of women, killing of children. We don't like that and we don't accept it. Then let's request Ariko to flight the agenda and also confirm who's in the meeting, who's not in the meeting. I know that I can see from the gadget, but let's just see who's in the meeting, who's not, and allow him to do the apologies. Over to you, Secretary.
Thank you, Chair. So the following members are in the meeting. Yourself, Chair, Mr. Nkosi, Mayor Mofokeng, Mr. Mbata, Mr. Bapti, Mr. Paulson, and Mr. Thring, and Mr. Komani, Chair. We received the following apologies, Chair. Mr. Milam, who due to prior engagements are unable to attend the meeting. And then Mr. Molefe is attending the Standing Committee on Finance, whose meeting is happening at the same time. And then Mr. Kwankwa indicated that he will join us from 9 o'clock, but will have to leave at 9:30 because he has to attend the Standing Committee on Appropriations. And then we've also received an apology from the Minister of Electricity and Energy due to a prior engagement, Chair. Those are the apologies received. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretary. Can I check the agenda so that we confirm both the agenda and also accept the apologies? Can you lead us, Secretary?
Sure, Chair. Today we'll be briefed by the Ministry of Electricity and Energy on the Just Energy Transition Plan and the Implementation Plan. And then we'll also consider and adopt the outstanding minutes of 13 November, Chair. Those are the agenda items for today, Chair.
Sorry, Secretary. Thank you very much for explaining us. Can I get a hand from the honorable members? Firstly, to accept the apologies as presented and also the adoption of the agenda. Or from the side of the department, Ariko, is there anyone who's leading the team?
I saw the DDG Mbambo, Chair, on the platform. I did not see the DG. And then, yeah, that's from the DMRE.
Thank you very much, Secretary. Mr. Mbambo, DDG, can we give you the chance to introduce who is with us? And also, if there are any apologies from your side, then you can also forward them. Over to you, DTG.
Good morning, Chair. Honorable, thank you very much. We would like to tender the apology for the DG and the team from the ministry. We are going to make the presentation. Let me just check with my colleague, Ntlamulo. Ntlamulo, may I just check with you from our team who's going to make the presentation?
And good morning to the chair and the members on the platform and colleagues. We have got Mr. Rudy Dix from the PMO, head of the PMO in the presidency, who's going to lead us in the presentation. Also going to be assisted by Ms. Joanne Mwawich from presidency, dealing with the presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, DTG. Then can I get a hand from the honorable members to accept both the apologies and also the adoption of the agenda?
Mr. Paulson's hand is raised, Chair.
I move for
And
both.
Mr. Kwankwa.
Okay, who's talking? Is it Paulson or Ngabayums?
Mr. Kwankwa, Chair.
Okay, Honorable Nkwankwa, thank you very much for adopting the agenda. Paulson, Honorable Paulson.
Unmute, Mr. Paulson.
Unmute, Honorable Member.
My apologies. Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning, Honorable Member. Good morning to the department and to the members of the Presidential Climate Change Commission. I second the move to adopt the agenda, but I don't accept the apology of the minister because this is something critical and he's not here. So I'd like to go on record that we don't accept that he is constantly at critical times not present in the meeting.
Okay, Honorable.
Apologies we can accept.
Okay, Honorable, noted. What we will do is to inform and pass the message to, in fact, the Mr. Ntlamulo is present with us. He will take that message and also we will also do that as the committee, but we can't not having the meeting because it is critical for the guests that have come to present this for us. It's noted. I've taken note of it. Then let's go. The agenda has been adopted by Honorable Nkwankwa, and then it has been seconded by Ms. Honorable Paulson. Then let's proceed with the presentation. DTG, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. As my colleague Ntlamulo has we are going to present as the department and first my colleague Mr. Dixon to then on the presentation.
Thank you, DTG. Over to you, Mr. Dix.
Thank you, Honorable Mvana, and also to the honorable members of the Portfolio Committee. Thank you, DDG, for introducing us. Perhaps just two quick points before we get into the presentation, and I'm just going to check, Ariko, you will be flighting the presentation, is that fine?
I gave you co-hosting rights, Mr.
Okay.
Dix, because I had Maya, which was struggling with her bandwidth. So
Yes,
I
yes,
gave you co-host.
I will do that. Perhaps just sorry, Honorable Mvana, I'll put on my camera as soon as I present, but I thought perhaps it's important just for PC
Recording in
members
progress.
to actually see that, see our faces initially. Just the one correction on the note that was sent out to portfolio committees, right? That the Just Energy Transition and the Just Energy Transition process, including the development of the investment plan that started way back in 2022, and the implementation plan is not a product of the Presidential Climate Commission. Presidential Climate Commission is an institution that is, of course, appointed by the president. It is a stakeholder body, and it sits under the National Economic Development and Labour Advisory Council. The work of the Just Energy Transition, as it is on the agenda for the investment plan and the implementation plan, is a product, of course, of internally of government, and Joanne and Sue will elaborate on that and how the process had worked. But it's an outcome of course, a cabinet conversation where the president had felt it necessary to convene an interministerial committee that was set up, of course, in the 6th administration, and a new interministerial committee, of course, set up with the responsibility of Minister Ramokgopa chairing that interministerial committee on the JET process. The president, of course, had requested, his office, myself as the the head of the project management office, to play the supporting role for departments, given the cross-cutting nature, to be able to bring together all different departments, entities, and elements into what was then adopted as the Just Energy Transition investment plan, and subsequently the implementation plan that the team will explain. So the product is not a PCC product, although the PCC was centrally involved in it. The product of the investment plan is a process of the interministerial committee, started well in the 6th administration and carried into the 7th administration, Honorable Chair. So I thought it's important just to clarify that. On the line, we have two other colleagues that heads up the Just Energy Project Management Unit in my office. And also to clarify that this unit is not in the Minister of Electricity, but we provide, through an intergovernmental relations framework, support for the IMC and for the Minister of Electricity in supporting his IMC that the president had appointed on the Just Energy Transition. So that's quite an important part of us playing an overall coordinating role as the presidency, and providing the technical input and the support for the process around the JET PMU, the JET process. Honorable Chair, the third point before I hand over is that, of course, the genesis of the Just Energy Transition investment plan and the implementation plan was largely a product in the making for many years. And of course, what did spur it on was the ambitious announcements that the South African government had made a few years ago for its national determined contribution, and that is its emissions targets that was set and announced and deposited with the United Nations framework of the UNFCCC, which is generally known as the COP, right? The COP process, Conference of the Parties. And that in itself set into motion a process with the ambition that we set out in the range leading up to 2030, that there were several offers from different countries around supporting South Africa's, ambitious decarbonization targets set out in the NDC. And the initial set of countries, of course, was the French, the Germans, the EU, the UK government, and the US government. And these were offers of support in various forms, right? Which will be identified in the slides, but really set into motion the process of offering financial support on the basis of an investment plan that we would develop and would own. So it's quite important to emphasize at the end of the day, the Just Energy Transition process is a South African-driven process. It's a process that has widely been consulted on, and at various steps we had, of course, consulted the PCC, or the PCC had helped us, consulted various stakeholders. In actual fact, in the 6th administration, we had also provided regular updates and feedback to the then portfolio committee on the Just Energy Transition process. Some of these events, of course, were launched at various COPs since COP26. I know some of the portfolio committee members here that have been part of that process. is an important step. So I thought it's just critical for us to give that kind of background and get into the weeds of actually what is in the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan and its implementation plan, and where we are right now, including the processes of engagement and as well the disbursement of funding to support the work that we're doing and what we've adopted as government. So thanks for that, and we'll just hand over to Joanne. And Joanne, I've got to now. Joanne, are you able to project, or Sue, are you able to project?
Morning, Honourable Chair, and morning members. I'm afraid that my fibre is down. My bandwidth is not great. It would be appreciated.
Let me quickly get it for you.
Yeah,
I just quickly
thank you
gonna get
very
it for you.
much. Yeah. Apologies for that.
Oh, Rudy, I can give Sue co-hosting rights as well.
Sue, do you have it at your fingertips?
Apologies, Chair and Rudy, I don't. I'm on my phone. Apologies for that.
Let me quickly find that. Sorry about that.
I'm so sorry.
Honourable Chair.
Maybe, Honourable Chair and Honourable members, while the slides come up, if I can just give a sense of what we will go through in this presentation. What we will do is firstly take you through some of the background to the investment plan and the implementation plan, and we'll explain the institutional arrangements that we are working within and that we are working towards establishing across government. And then what we will do in the rest of the presentation is to go through the different portfolios, what we call portfolios in the investment plan, in a fair amount of detail in order to do two things. The first is really to explain to you where we sit in relation to financial mobilization and the financial targeting. And then the second thing is to be able to talk about where each of the areas of work is currently. So that should leave you by the end of the presentation with a very comprehensive view of where progress sits in relation to the work that we are undertaking, where we have managed to make headway and where there are still challenges that we are working to overcome. Thank you. So just to recap, in the first few slides, I'll move through fairly fast on the basis that this is a recap. So as Mr. Dix had explained, on the left-hand side of the slide, you see a graph of the country's nationally determined contribution that operates as a range. We would like to reduce our emissions to within a target of between 420 and 350 megatons of carbon equivalent. That we could do at the top, the 420 megatons we could do on our own as a country. To do anything more, we really do need support from a very wide range of sources. We estimate that would cost around 1.5 trillion rands over a 5-year period till 2027, focused on 3 priority sectors: the electricity sector, new energy vehicles, and green hydrogen, with 2 programs that are essential to underpin that work. Firstly, work around skills development, and secondly, work around building municipal capacity around the just transition. At the bottom, the 8 bullet slides at the bottom set out the objectives of a just energy transition, and they really set out how we must do this. So we need to do this in a way that protects vulnerable workers and communities, that builds energy security and energy access, that promotes industrial diversification and development, that develops sustainable livelihood and spurs inclusive economic growth. And I think the how, as you will see in the presentation, is as important as the what. And next slide. Okay, so in the investment plan, as Mr. Dick said, was developed during 2022. In November, the president asked the Presidential Climate Commission, and we've explained the difference between the institutions, to run public consultations on it. It was also handed over to a wide set of international partners at the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. And at that point, a group of international countries, which we'll look at in closer detail just now, pledged $8.5 billion in loans and grants towards South Africa's just energy transition. The project management unit that we are part of and that reports into Mr. Dix's project management office was also established in January 2023 to prepare the JET implementation plan and really to take this work forward. And then Cabinet approved the implementation plan in November 2023, and it was then presented to the UN Secretary General at the COP in Dubai. Next slide. So that really is the background to where we are at. This slide sets out essentially the core areas of the work that we are undertaking. I've spoken to the green electricity, green hydrogen, and new energy vehicle portfolios. In addition to the skills in municipalities, we have a specific focus on Mpumalanga, because in the process of the energy transition, there's considerable risks to workers and communities in Mpumalanga, and we'll go into that in quite a lot more depth. And going forward, we will also be doing work around building a financing portfolio for energy efficiency, the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan, when that is approved, as well as for a road to rail program. All of this is underpinned by the work around financing and funding mobilization, stakeholder engagement, as well as the building of a monitoring, evaluation, and learning framework so that we can really determine the impact of the work. Next slide.
Is it
Next
moving?
slide. No, it isn't. Well, on my side, it isn't moving.
Oh, gosh.
Oh dear. Honorable Chair and members, may we ask if the slides have moved on your side or they stuck?
It's moved on my side, Chair.
Okay.
Hasn't moved my side.
Okay. All right. So we are on the governance and institutional architecture slide. Okay. So this slide sets out the institutional architecture and the governance arrangements. Mr. Dix has spoken to essentially to the top half of the slide. And starting at the bottom, you have the JET project management unit, which is responsible for driving implementation and facilitating the implementation of the plan. That reports into the project management office in the presidency. We then account into a JET government steering committee that has not only all of the responsible departments, but also includes institutions like the Industrial Development Corporation, the Development Bank of South Africa, the Presidential Climate Commission, and Eskom. That then reports in turn into the JET Interministerial Committee, which is chaired by Minister Ramokgopa, and that in turn reports into Cabinet. So that is the upward chain of accountability. What we are trying to do in that bottom half of the slide is to ensure that this work is embedded across government and that we build the projects and the programs that would enable us to deploy and raise the finance necessary in order to take the just energy transition forward. So what we are doing is identifying for each one of those portfolios that we set out in the slides before a lead institution. We are looking at capacitating those lead institutions with a permanent secretariat capacity, and that institution will establish a council or a forum or a committee of all of the key stakeholders, both within and outside of government, so multi-stakeholder committees. And they will then establish a set of work streams that will develop the projects and the programs that will drive the just energy transition forward. And as I go through the slides and the individual portfolios, I will identify who are the institutions that are who are the lead institutions for each of the portfolios. Thank you. Next slide. We've jumped. Yeah, thank you. Okay. This slide, and I'll dwell on it in a little bit of detail, sets out the current state of the international financing that has been pledged to the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan as of November 2024. The top half of the slide sets out the different countries that have made pledges and whose contributions are recognized. And along the top, what we've set out is the different categories of finance. So on the left-hand side is the grant finance. There is a total of, at the bottom, of 836 million pledged, of which around half of that has been programmed. Doesn't mean that that the activities have all been implemented or carried out, but there is a process underway. That grant finance is really critical for South Africa. And as I talk more about the just transition and about what we need to do in order to support affected workers, communities, and SMMEs, although it is the smallest part of the package, it is undeniably absolutely critical for us to meet our socioeconomic objectives. There are then highly concessional loans. It's a $450 million coming from the Climate Investment Funds, which is a multilateral climate finance institution. And that money is on very, very attractive terms and largely supports Eskom and communities in Mpumalanga around the energy transition. There's then around a total of around $7 billion in concessional loans, and there is the money that has been the slowest to flow for a number of reasons. Partly because a lot of that finance was initially intended to flow directly to Eskom. And given the debt moratorium that Eskom is operating under, Eskom hasn't been able to borrow. And there are a whole lot of interventions underway to address that we'll deal with at a later stage. There is then commercial debt and equity that is supporting a wide range of enterprises, largely from the US and the UK, but also from the Spanish government and the European Union, as well as Denmark, that is intended to support essentially the private sector element of the transition. The Spanish have put export credits on the table as well, and the total of those bilateral contributions is $9.9 billion. And when you add the contributions from the multilateral development banks and the multilateral finance funds, climate finance funds, you're looking at a total of $13.897 billion. Important to say that some of that finance has also gone to national treasury in the form of policy loans against objectives that then support the transition. Next slide. Okay, so to talk in a little bit more detail around the finance, on the left-hand side of the slide is the adding up to the 1.48 billion rand is the amounts that were set out in the investment plan that would be needed in order to achieve our ambitions. Important to say that the area around skills development that was set out in the original investment plan during the course of the public consultation and the further work that was followed was judged not to be adequate, and so that 2.7 billion amount is being increased in the current work that is underway. In terms of the grants, important to say we'll come onto the JET funding platform, and we will talk about how that is going to accelerate the grant deployment and the targeting of those grants. I've spoken to the debt moratorium and the challenges. I think that also in order to ensure that our country's energy security is not jeopardized, some of the dates that had been set for power stations reaching the end of the economic and operational life has been extended, and that has had an impact on the flow of funds. Then I've spoken to the challenges that we're facing in the deployment of the concessional loans, but $600 million has flowed to National Treasury. And then to talk a little bit more about the commercial debt and equity, the bulk of that funding is intended to go into independent power producer projects and transmission to support the country's transmission, particularly once the system is in place to support private investment in transmission. Yeah, so I think that we are expecting going forward that there is a significant amount of finance that will come in from the private sector, that we can expect to see more government, more of the fiscal budgets being allocated to the just energy transition, and as well as looking at the way that we can mobilize finance at scale for municipal distribution infrastructure, support the rollout of the new energy vehicle sector, particularly for the purposes of improving the public transport sector. And then in relation to green hydrogen, we still need large-scale investments by both private and public sectors that are secured by international offtake agreements so that it can make it worthwhile for us to make these very expensive investments in country. Next slide. Okay, so I've spoken about the grant element of the finance and spoken about how important it is. And we have done, as part of our work, we did an analysis of all of the grants that are sitting in this package, trying to look at each individual one and what it was being used for and how that money was being spent. And when we did that, one of the things that we discovered is that there was a great deal of money going into things like technical assistance, capacity building, and research, but very little of it going to projects on the ground, in particular to projects that are run by SMMEs, community-based organizations, trade unions, NGOs, and government institutions, including municipalities. And so I think that in terms of the just energy transition, one of the critical things that we need to be doing is to be supporting communities, communities on the ground, to be able to create the kinds of infrastructure and livelihoods that they want to establish in the way that they want to do it. So you have this gap. And at the same time, what we realized is that although there are many wonderful ideas from communities, trade unions, and SMMEs, many of them are not necessarily framed in a way that makes it easy for money to flow to them. And so we came up with the idea of establishing something called a jet funding platform. It was launched in Mpumalanga on the 25th of October this year. And what it is a matchmaking facility that does two main things. The first is that it will provide project preparation support services, particularly to communities and organizations on the ground. We're piloting it in Mpumalanga, so a great deal of the focus of this work will be in the Mpumalanga province over the next year or two, but ultimately we want to roll it out nationally. And then what it will do is to provide a link into the JET grant funders. So the International Partners Group and other donors, the development finance institutions, multilateral development banks, philanthropies, and corporate CSI money. And it will ensure that there is a much tighter and better flow of funding into those organizations on the ground so that we can start to ensure that there is firstly a thriving project pipeline, but also that the kinds of initiatives and interventions that communities want to see happen. So the focus areas are about social and economic support for affected workers and communities, to enable economic diversification planning with an initial focus on Mpumalanga, to provide startup capital alongside debt and equity for new enterprises, and particularly for SMMEs, including credit enhancement for small, medium, and micro enterprises, and that is often the big constraint in SMMEs getting up and running. We want to see that funds going into reskilling and upskilling initiatives for workers entering the green economy, both existing workers as well as youth coming onto the labor market. We want to look at, importantly, piloting renewable energy, community and social ownership models. And for us, this is a critically important issue, that in particular, the poor communities start to have access to renewable energy in the same way as those who can afford to provide it privately. The money will also be used for research, innovation, and intermediary support for community development. So in other words, enabling communities to build the institutions that would enable them to undertake the activities that they want. We're looking at capacity building for state institutions, municipalities in particular, trade unions and community-based organizations. And then I've spoken to the technical assistance for project preparation and business development support. And yeah, okay. We'll then go on to, it isn't on full slides. Okay, thank you. We'll then go into each of these portfolios. So what the country needs is that by the 2030s, we need above 5 gigawatts per year of renewable generation must be built and connected. However, our transmission grid is inadequate, and geographically it's mismatched to the favorable locations for solar and wind power generation. So the Eastern Cape, the Northern Cape, the Western Cape, and the Eastern Cape are where we have the best resource, but the grid there has run out of space. So the country has agreed, and Eskom's transmission development plan sets out that at least 1,400 kilometers of transmission lines must be built per year over the next 5 years, and it's at a cost of 131 billion rand. At the moment, we are far below that in terms of Eskom's capacity. So what we are seeing as a potential solution is that those concessional loans that haven't been deployed of between $3.5 and $5 billion US dollars can be used for transmission investment, and they could be used for about between 5,000 and 8,000 kilometers of line. And so that would have to be channeled through the National Transmission Company of South Africa, which is a wholly owned Eskom subsidiary, and at the moment, which can't borrow independently. So the NTCA is preparing to upscale transmission grids investment and working with the Ministry of Energy and Electricity and National Treasury to look at the systems needed to procure independent power transmission investments in the grid. And we are seeing that this JET money would be ideally used for that. There is then finance from the climate investment funds that is for retiring and replacing coal-based power generation capacity at the point that Eskom decides that that capacity has reached the end of economic and operational life. It is intended to provide community money for community development projects in Mpumalanga. There's $50 million of grant that needs to be directed into that. And then there is funds that have been set aside for energy efficiency, distributed generation, and the kind of community generation that I spoke about earlier, and that too is being programmed. What has happened here is that in the initial investment plan for this work that was approved internationally, The focus was around the end of life for Camden, Grootvlei, and Hendrina coal stations. And given the country's energy supply constraint, Eskom has rescheduled the decommissioning of those 3 power stations to 2030. But it has also demonstrated internationally that it can meet the target that was set in terms of emissions reductions by emissions reductions across its fleet. And at the moment, what we have done is we have updated this investment plan. We've taken it to the climate investment funds and are waiting for approval. And then the programming of this finance, starting with the work around the community development projects, and the programming of that into a set of projects will begin so that that finance can flow. This money is really important because it is incredibly cheap finance. Particularly the $450 million of highly concessional loans are highly, the terms of that money is highly attractive. So this is a really important program to get going. And on the right-hand side of that slide, in the box on the side, you'll see that there is a big intergovernmental team that has been constituted that also brings the multilateral development banks in, so the African Development Bank and the World Bank, working with all of the relevant government departments as well as the province in order to program and to ensure that this finance is programmed and that it starts to flow in the next year. Next slide. To talk a little bit about, I've spoken about how important Mpumalanga is. So the priorities for the portfolio are really to support effective stakeholder engagement for the implementation of the Mpumalanga JET, to mobilize funding for the project pipeline through identifying viable projects, supporting project preparation and matchmaking with the funding platform, and then supporting community and worker-led development in the coal belt. So in 2024, what has happened is that we have supported the PCC and the province and others to address immediate community transition needs at Komati through mobilizing finance from the Social Employment Fund, as well as other NGO partners. And there's been a lot of work to address some of the challenges that have happened at Komati. In Mpumalanga, the province has set up an Mpumalanga Just Transition and Climate Change Coordinating Committee, as well as a multi-stakeholder Just Energy Transition Forum. It's appointed the Mpumalanga Green Cluster Agency as its secretariat, and we are in the process of signing an MOU between the presidency and the MGCA. And that MOU is designed to support the growing pipeline of JET projects in the coal belt. And those projects are being built at the moment and include projects in the agriculture, renewable energy value chain, skills development, mine rehabilitation, and community-level social projects supporting these community and worker-level developments. And this is where we are focusing the work of the funding platform. In terms of the Mpumalanga Just Transition, importantly, I think the province has identified that it would want to grow existing and new activity in the agriculture, tourism, green economy, and manufacturing sectors, with an emphasis on the clean energy value chain, infrastructure and services, mine rehabilitation and post-mining development, including the jobs that can be created out of that, reducing air pollution and environmental action, growing new and small SMMEs, looking at community-level socio-economic projects across health, education, and social support services. And this is really, really important in order to ensure that the poorest people in those communities are not left worse off, and in fact, that we significantly improve their livelihoods, supporting social ownership models that I've spoken to already, skills and capacity building projects, and public employment programs for the unemployed. And this work is, so the Mpumalanga province is the lead institution, and we are working to support what they are doing. Next slide. In relation to municipalities, The SALGO is the lead institution, we have established a multi-stakeholder JET Municipal Council with 3 work streams. One, a capability work stream that is led by SALGO and COGTA, a finance work stream led by the Development Bank, an energy access work stream led by the DMRE and the Department of Energy and Electricity. The priorities for that portfolio, there's 6 of them. Firstly, ensuring that JET is reflected as a priority in municipal plans and budgets. We had a conference earlier on this year where all of the leadership of the municipal sector came together with the ministers and with the president to build this plan. Secondly, mobilizing JET funding for electricity distribution investment. We want to capacitate municipalities to deliver on their JET plans. We want to support them in adjusting their operating models for changing energy markets. We are looking to work with them on how we support equitable access to energy for the poor and support energy efficiency in investments. So it really a big focus on capacity, capability, planning, and investments in distribution infrastructure and in ways that the municipal system can support access to renewable energy for the poor. Next slide. On the skills portfolio, the lead institution is the Department of Higher Education and Training. We're setting up a JET skills desk located in the Office of the Director General. It will be supported and engage with the multi-stakeholder JET Skills Advisory Forum that will be convened by the Human Resources Development Council. And then what we are establishing are 3 skills development zones that will be linked to TVET colleges and providers in 3 areas with critical value chains. So one in Mpumalanga linked to the electricity sector, one in the Eastern Cape linked to the new energy vehicle sector, and one in the Northern Cape linked to the green hydrogen economy. And the intention of all of that is to bring everybody together to be able to work to build their capacity on the one hand, to ensure quality of what is being provided, and then to ensure that all of the education service providers in those areas are working in one direction in order to be able to ensure that we are providing the right skills at the right times for the right industries. There's also an important partnership with the private sector in terms of being able to ensure that the supply of skill that we are looking at developing is really matched to the jobs opportunities that sit in the private sector and elsewhere. So in this year, we want to set up all of that infrastructure. On green hydrogen, the Industrial Development Corporation is the lead institution. They are busy establishing the capacity to be able to drive this work. The Ministry of Energy and Electricity chairs the Africa Green Hydrogen Alliance, and that is doing a lot of work engaging with the Netherlands, Germany, Japan, and South Korea on market opportunities for South Africa. There has been some funding that has flowed to date. In particular, it is set out in the box on the left. So there's 32 million euros from the EU to accelerate green hydrogen plans. There's a German Development Bank grant of 23 million euros that is sitting with the IDC that has supported a lot of these projects getting up and running. There is a $1 billion green hydrogen fund being developed by the private sector, supported by the Dutch government, the Netherlands. And then there's an agreement in that context being finalized with an organization called Invest International for a 50 million euros of grant funding to be deployed to the fund. Work is being done around green hydrogen standards. So the Bureau of Standards has convened a working committee. There is a list of the green hydrogen projects that are in progress. There are 24 of them. There's also a green ammonia feasibility study nearing completion at Preska. There's a project at Hive in Kuche that is progressing well. In Saldanha, there's a whole set of projects in development. Equipment manufacturing projects are progressing as well. Thank you. We can move on to the next slide. In relation to the new energy vehicles portfolio, again, the IDC is the lead institution at the moment and is setting up the necessary capacity. There are also other work happening. The Department of Transport is developing a just transition transport plan and also updating the green transport strategy. In terms of the work in progress, DTIC and the National Treasury are currently finalizing the new energy vehicle incentive policies. Cape Town has budgeted 8.5 billion rand for electrification of public transport buses and has tendered that out, as well as the fact that Golden Arrow, as a private producer, is transforming its fleet to electric buses from 2025 onwards. The DBSA is running an electric vehicle bus program in Tshwane and eThekwini in partnership with Senedi. And then there is P4G, which is a UK institution, has awarded grant funding to an electric vehicle charging and software company to support the rollout of that charging infrastructure. Eskom Distribution is also doing work to look at its network and build the skills to incorporate EV charging into national and local electricity infrastructure plans. And then the IDC is doing work on localization of the NEV value chain. So there is a fair amount of work that is happening there. And I think there have been announcements by the DTIC that this will be an increasing focus of theirs. Thank you. I think that I am at the end. So thank you, Honourable Chair.
One last slide on the MIL framework, please.
Oh, sorry. Apologies. The last, I did speak about the monitoring, evaluation and learning. There is a theory of change done for the plan and its 6 portfolios. We have set up impact indicators and milestones for 2024 to 2027. Working with a steering committee that brings in all of the relevant departments and institutions. We will be publishing quarterly JET IP monitoring reports from September 2024. The first one has just been completed it goes up until September 2024. It has just been completed. And we'll be doing a whole set of evaluations of this work in 2024, 2025 that really look at or in-depth looks at some of the areas where we need to get more clarity and greater direction in the work. So economic diversification, what are the employment creating investment opportunities, how do we track changes in livelihoods, and we'll be doing that work over the next year or so. And no doubt we'll be reporting regularly, Honourable Chair and members, to this committee on the results of that. Thank you. And the team, Honourable Chair, the team will now take questions under your guidance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me give over. You can switch off your video for the next. Thank you.
Thanks.
Honourable members, there is the presentation. Maybe let's interact it, comments, questions. I'll give hands. Okay. I see the hand of Honourable Paulson, Honourable Tring, Honourable Bapti. Then I will also give other hands. Can we follow that sequence?
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thank you very much, Ms. Yowich, for the presentation. Chairperson, it always looks very nice on paper, and but the devil's in the detail. And a big part of this, over and above us having to transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy power sources, is the fact that there will be workers in the coal industry that will be affected. Number one, I want to know how many of them, how many workers we're looking at here, and then also in terms of our abundance of coal that we have, what are the plans with it? I mean, it's we have these good Samaritans from all over the world giving us money to transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. Are they, what are they purchasing our coal? Those very same countries that's giving us money. And if not, what is our plans with that coal? There's lots of it. It could last us up to 400 or 500 years if we were to stick with coal. And also, in terms of the just energy transition, let's say we're going to stick with coal. Are we looking at technologies like clean coal technologies so that we don't have to entirely transition away from coal as a baseload energy source? And then in terms of our new transmission grids, we're replacing the current, or we not going to extend the current transmission grids, because obviously the frequency of renewable energy is very different from the frequency of fossil fuel based energy sources. So we have to build our own new transmission grid for renewable energy. And in terms of what that would cost, and the amount of money we're receiving, would that be sufficient to build a whole new transmission system or transmission network? And then also in terms of the components for a renewable energy system, we're talking about controllers, regulators, inverters, solar modules, batteries, generators, and wind generators. Are we building the capacity to develop these components locally? Because if you're going to have to import everything, it defeats the purpose of transitioning or transitioning to renewable energy. We're not going to have components locally. And I do recall Ms. Yawich saying that they are engaging with tertiary institutions to prepare them. And I'd like to know, so in terms of, like especially TVET colleges where they are more practical and they produce things, they can be put to use. Are we developing special institutions that will actually focus on building these components and developing them, as opposed to us, going to import everything from France and Germany? So I think those are the important things that, in terms of our training and development, are we ready for the transition, as opposed to training people to go and run coal power stations? We now have to train people to run solar plants, wind farms, and in addition to that, also develop components for those plants locally as opposed to importing everything. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Paulson. Can we give over to Honorable Green?
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I want to begin by saying that while we appreciate the need to protect our environment, we cannot take our eyes off what, in my view, is the weaponizing of the climate change legislation that we currently see, particularly the climate change legislation coming from your first world and your developing countries. And I say that because your first world, your developed countries rather, from where much of the climate change legislation is emanating, is legislation that is preferable to their economies, but legislation which can also be punitive to our economy and to some extent also act as trade barriers. If one just looks at the legislation in terms of CBAM, for example, and we've dealt with this. I sit also on the Department of Trade and Industry, and this was discussed in the previous administration of how the carbon border adjustment mechanism being introduced by your European countries, where certain metals like your steel and aluminium and such like, in terms of the CBAM legislation, employing huge tariffs on steel that is exported that is not considered to be green. But when it comes to the critical minerals and metals that Europe needs for their economy, no tariffs, no extra tariffs for the critical minerals that Europe needs. Additionally, when it comes to the agricultural sector, there's also the tariffs that are placed on our agricultural sector, because the agricultural sectors, and these are carbon, so-called protecting the environment tariffs. But to a large extent, it is because our agricultural sector is so efficient that it outstrips, to some extent, the agricultural sector in Europe, where we're able to provide a better quality fruit at a lower cost, despite the fact that our farmers do not receive subsidies from our government, where your European farmers, many of them actually do receive subsidies as well. And so we have to be wary of your first world developed countries using the climate narrative to subjugate, to a large extent, your developing and your third world countries, in order to ensure that none of the developing and third world countries supersede or grow at a faster rate than developed countries, or are seen to be a competitor to your developed and first world countries. I think in addition to that, we cannot ignore the fact that the vast majority of carbon emissions are from your developed countries and from your first world countries. The large contributors to carbon emissions are the United States, Europe, China, India, amongst others. But these are the largest contributors. And these are contributors of carbon emissions and polluting our atmosphere over generations. And so to penalize your developing and your developed country and your third world countries for a problem that you have created is unjust. We talk about a just energy transition, but it is unjust when such legislation is used against our the south, south versus the north, or your developing countries and third world countries. Africa as a whole, with the 54, I think, countries in Africa, contribute less than 4% of the carbon emissions. 4%. So what is South Africa's contribution of carbon emissions? If Africa as a whole, so South Africa's contribution must be 0 point something % of carbon emissions. And so we cannot be placing onerous legislative climate legislation on our economy, where previous economies used coal, industrialized their nations, and they are where they are because of their industrial revolutions. They are where they are because of their use of fossil fuels. Another example is where gas was also considered to be a fossil fuel. But because gas is largely used in the European countries and in your developing countries, it has now been allowed. And some concessions are being made for the European countries. No penalties, concessions are being made. Particular countries to continue to use gas so that their economies do not fail. And so I think that we must not take our eye off the. We cannot become subjects, colonial subjects, as in the past, where our countries have been exploited and abused by the larger economies. Chair, when we look at concessional finance offered to South Africa, concessional finance is still finance that has to be repaid. And a large portion of that 1.5 trillion rand in terms of grants and concessional finances and some equities and so on that are coming towards the JET. A large portion of that is concessional finance. And one of the concerns that I have is where South Africa currently is, where we have right now a debt to GDP of some approaching 75%. This debt is crowding out service delivery in some key departments with some austerity measures. And so we have challenges, I think, from an economic view. And my question here is, what role then will that concessional finance have increasing our debt to GDP? Also noting that at this particular stage, even in terms of our BOP, balance on payments, we currently also have a deficit, and the debt to GDP on our balance of payments is some just under 1%. And that's something also in terms of our balance of payments that needs to be turned around. And whether the greening, and I think Honorable Paulson asks a critical question, whether South Africa and the South African economy is actually ready for the greening of our economy without moving away from our base load in terms of the usage of coal. And maybe let me also just indicate while I'm there that South Africa has some 200 years worth of coal beneath our soil. And I think that if one looks at what happened at Komatipoort, there are lessons there, things that should never have happened. While funding was supposed to be made available for the transition and to take care of the social consequences, I think that Komatipoort is a failure in terms of just the social consequences of the number of people that have actually lost their jobs and the failure of the so-called the greening and your solar panels that are supposed to be generating the energy that was lost by Komati Port. And that took place at a time where South Africa was going through a huge challenge of load shedding. And we shut down Komati Port. And I think that the Minister of Electricity and Energy lamented the fact and said it was not the right decision to shut down Komati Port at a time where we needed every bit of electricity that could be generated possible. But on the social side of things, Eskom itself acknowledges the mistakes that were made. Over 300 employees and only 50% of those employees were retained. But you then also have subcontractors, and if one looks at the scale of the downstream workers, subcontractors, and the lady that has been selling her fat cakes or magwinyas and other little goods to the workers, and the economy that was created around that power station that is now gone. The aquaponics economy, for example, they say on the first day that all the fish died. But the negative consequences on the people around, in and around Komati Port, some 2 years later, we are now talking about looking at a social investment and an upgrading. But for 2 years, the people around Komati Port have been suffering. And so these are lessons that certainly have to be learned and cannot be repeated. I wonder what we say also, Chair, and what is the narrative around the fact that we have some 15 or so to 17 power stations. But when one looks at what China has, they have over 1,000 plus, and are building currently 100 or so power stations, coal power stations. China. The United States has over 200 power stations, coal power stations. Germany is looking at firing up again its coal power stations. Australia is starting those coal power stations that they shut down because of the challenges with regards to no proper planning in bringing on the green energy, solar, wind, and so on. And so what is our position? And there's silence around the other larger nations like China and others in Europe now that are going back to gas and going back to coal. And the excuse is, well, we have a war. We have a war, Russia, Ukraine. The war is not in Europe. We have a war. We have a war of unemployment. We have a war of poverty in South Africa, where it is said that some 1 out of 4 South Africans, 25% of South Africans, go to bed hungry. And I think that if we do not address these challenges and ensure that indeed the JET is just, and the emphasis has to be on just, then we are setting ourselves up for failure. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Bapti.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the presenter for that background on the just energy transition. And given the very broad scope of the sectors involved, the structures involved are quite complex. Which brings me to my first question, and that is, I know at the end of the presentation, we received a slide on the monitoring side of the JET. But I would like the presenter just to run through again how the portfolio is going to be kept abreast of developments within the JET, how often that will happen with effect from the beginning of next year, and what criteria and indicators are going to be used in presenting us with that information. And the one aspect of this that concerns me the most is the protection of people's livelihoods, and not just the protection of existing livelihoods, but the growing of opportunity for more people to be employed. And I don't think the just energy transition can only be about finding alternatives and places for people who are currently employed. It must involve growth in employment, which obviously means growth in economic activity. And I'm quite sure that's fairly covered in most of what is presented. But the way in which that is interpreted, or that information is extracted and presented to us so that we can have a firm grip on the social impact of the JET. For me, that's the questions I'd like clarified. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Baptiste. I'm checking other hands. Seemingly there are none.
Can I just come in, Chairperson?
Okay.
Sorry for not showing my hands on. I was just hoping that I'm not going to talk, but it's not a matter of undermining anybody. My apology.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. First thing, let me welcome the presentation by the way it is. And then we are looking forward to make sure that we cough out what we gained out of this presentation. The first thing that I just want to do as a question is about the minings that we have here in Africa or in South Africa. As far as now, they are on a point to scrap using our coal as starting to name it as a air pollution source. We want to know what are they going to do with the productions, or what is their plan with our productions of coal that they've been utilized and now they are tired. They are bringing up something that can disgrade the coals in South Africa. We want to know the plans of the people who have been working in the mines. As far as we understand that these people are going to be sent home because the new energy that they call it clean is coming up. And the other thing again, we want to know up to so far after 30 years, the presenter, I'm sure that she was introduced on the drafting of this presentation. She read it before she came here, but unapologetically so she came here, come and read for us the name poor. We want to know when they talk about poor, to whom do they refer to? As far as we know, they refer to us as Black people. How does she feel coming here to present this thing to us and regarding us as poor in this democratical standard of 30 years? And for my request, we would like to see this presentation to be redone. And we don't want to see this thing of grading us to poor people. We don't want to see it again, because she is not referring to the one of her color. She is referring to Black. It is a standard of where they undermine Black to where even they can name us poor. And that is why they can even bring up sources that maybe they call them clean, and then as our coal now today, they call it dirty, that can pollute the air. Meanwhile, we have been using this coal for more than 200 years, as one of our committee member have illustrated. Then so today the people must go home because they want to invent something that is from their own countries. What we prefer the most is to them to tell us what are they going to make us be doing with our coal, because it's the minerals that is from our ground, from our country. This is our wealth that it must benefit us. Then now when they come with their own ideology of scraping it off, they must have a space where they're here to tell us, okay, because you were having mines
where your children were working there, or your brothers, sisters, and mothers. They were getting money from there to take care of you. Now, when we scrap this, it means it will no more be in an effective use. Then, so we will like to know what is their plan with the code, and is that plan going to benefit us, or is still going to display a manner of robbing black people in South Africa? And then on the source of the green energy that they are bringing, we will like to congratulate them for at least displaying the way of how are they going to work with communities, like the skill development, the energy security. And the security must not only be with the energy, they must consider our people's security, a safety to our people, where they are going to send their energy. Because in most cases, these people who came here and do this presentation, they're selfish, actually. They're only about themselves and their products. They don't worry about the South Africans who are going to be alive endangered by their products. And then so we will appeal for them at least to come with a program or a displayed paperwork that will show how are we going to be safe. And we wish that $15 million that they're talking about for the community development in Mpumalanga, it must not just be a paperwork. We would like to see that development they promise in Mpumalanga. And they can only do that because we know, as far as they see the fish is swimming over the water, they can even make it $100 million because they see the big fish swimming over the water, which can be seen by even a blind person. Then so we are asking to make from them to make sure that they provide what is written on the paper. The report must be given annually so that we can see the progress. We will need the progress report, because we can just display the money here while they know what they are hunting in Mpumalanga. It's worth more than this. And we want them to come up with a plan. How are they going to take care of us, vulnerable people who don't make it themselves or others amongst us? How are they going to provide their energy that can be equals to their lives? Because we are not earning the same. We got people who are earning low. You can times it out to, according to the way you can. Then we want to know how are they going to secure them so that they can be on the same level, even if not the same, so that they can be happy for living with people who can care themselves. And then up to so far, Chairperson, let me just thank you for considering me, while even if I've never raised hands. Thank you very much, Honorable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable. Can I give over to Honorable Ngosi, followed by Honorable Mfokeng?
Thank you, Chair. Greetings to yourself and honorable members in the meeting. Chairperson, I think, Chair, when we speak of transition, in particular, the energy transition, that is just, I think it should be, by all means, Chairperson, fair. And it has to be pro our people. It has to be pro to our economy. So if the just energy transition, it's not like that, I think we won't be doing justice to our people and our country as well. Chairperson, on the presentation that we just had now, I was not really convinced that it has covered the increasement of our energy security, on which, Chair, we know that we are from load shedding, and we felt it and we suffered under it. So I was hoping I will be convinced through the presentation that if we are doing the transition, we will not have such problems again, because you can imagine if we scrap out our coal power stations and we go back and have such challenges that we had before, it will be a problem. I just wanted maybe to be convinced with regard that the transition will be able to cover the increment of our energy security, that we will not have challenges that we had before with regard to load shedding, etc. And I wasn't also convinced, Chair, with regarding to boosting of our economic growth and assurance as well that we won't have issues of our people losing their jobs and losing also the towns where our coal power stations are, because immediately when the power station is closed down, you must know that that town will be a ghost town. So I wasn't really convinced, Chair. I was just maybe hoping maybe that the plan and that we have will be able to cover all that, Chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Nkosi. Can we request the one who has unmute to mute, because we can hear that there is someone who's speaking at the background. Over to you, Honorable Mofokeng. Yes.
Thank you, Chair, and greetings to honorable members in the meeting. Let me also welcome the presentation, Chairperson. Chairperson, I would like to know what are the greatest opportunities for the sustainable investment and impact in the just energy transition? That's my only question, Chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Mofokeng. Can we give over to the presenters? They will see which ones are they going to take and share with the other one and with Mr. Tix.
Thank you, Honorable Chair, Honorable Mvana. I will come in at the end, and thanks to the Portfolio Committee and honorable members for the important constructive questions and comments. We'll avoid the comments so that we don't spend too much time on that, Honorable Mvana, because I think these are comments that are quite important in the way that we've developed, and I think there are large chunks of what has been said that we fundamentally agree with. I'll ask Joanne to start, and then I will cover some of the areas that she won't cover, if that's okay, Joanne. Joanne, do you want to get into it, and then I'll come at the end if that's fine, okay?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Honorable Chair and members, and thanks for all of these questions and comments. I think that where I want to begin is with time frame, and with the fact that we are looking at a very long-term transition. So what we are talking about in this plan is what is going to happen over the next 5 years. But I think in the longer term, the question is what is going to happen over the next 30 or 40 years. And so what we would want to avoid in the way that this plan is implemented is sudden and unplanned shocks to the system that do exacerbate unemployment, and that do exacerbate unemployment and the destruction of local economies. So I think that what this work is about saying there is a long-term trend globally as well as in South Africa, one of the big problems that we have across the African continent, for example, is the fact that when China took a decision not to finance coal outside of China 4 or 5 years ago, that really destroyed a great deal of the coal development projects that were planned across the continent, and I think set some very fundamental changes in place. So it's a kind of set of global issues. In relation to Honourable Paulson's comments around the workers affected, I don't think that piece of work has been done in its complete entirety, in part because in order to do that, we would need to understand the plans of all of the individual coal mines. And that is work that the province is looking at. But in the coal value chain, as we understand it at this point in time, and there is very valuable work that has been done by Professor Borat from the University of Cape Town, is that there are about 100,000 workers in the coal value chain. So that's not just only in coal mines and in coal power stations, but in the value chain more broadly. So it would include, as was referred to, the people who provide food to the workers. It would include the people who transport coal. It would include the people who are in the maintenance industry. And that is really what we need to be looking at, is how do we support and protect that value chain and those workers. In relation to transmission, this is not about building a new grid. It is about the expansion of the existing grid in order to be able to connect not only more renewables, but more diverse energy into the grid. So if we look at where we have come in relation to load shedding as a country, we've had an absolute deficit of energy. But we also need to plan for growth. We don't want to be an under 1% economy. So in addition to the linking of greater amounts of renewables into the grid, we are going to need to, in the long run, over the next 20, 30 or 40 years, plan for a significant increase in our energy capacity as a country, a very wide range of energy capacity, and that is going to require the expansion of the grid. In relation to the municipal distribution grid, there is a lot also of upgrading and extension that is going to be needed. So I just wanted to clarify that isn't about a completely new grid. In relation to the skills needs of this transition and whether they are being served, there is some excellent work that is being done in some of the TVET colleges around the country. I think including in Mpumalanga, in Gauteng, in the Western Cape and in the Northern Cape, there's some excellent work being done. But that work needs to be embedded and deepened and scaled up across the country. And so the purpose of establishing skills development zones in different parts of the country is precisely to be able to do that. In particular, I think that the Atlantis, SEZ, and the TVET colleges that support that in the Western Cape have done a lot of very useful on-the-ground training of young people to bring them into some of the high-end manufacturing that is happening in the renewables value chain. Honourable Thring, we note the comments that have been made. I think the President Ramaphosa has consistently made it very clear that South Africa needs to transition at a pace and a scale that it can afford, and that transition needs to be driven by national imperatives and our national circumstances. So I think to confirm that. I think that what we are seeing, however, is that we are a globally linked economy, and we trade widely around the world. And increasingly, in many different ways, there are carbon barriers. One of the important things that has been done in our own economy is that National Treasury has put in place a carbon tax. That carbon tax is a new document has just come out on how that carbon tax will be applied. And to the extent that we have national measures in place, the international measures then are discounted and take that into account. So I think that that is one of our own national measures that have been put in place to mitigate the effect of that. But I do think, in particular, in relation to the automotive industry, not so much coal, because I think we see that we will be using coal in South Africa for very many years to come, and that there is likely to be a global market in coal for many, many years to come. It might be a reduced market, but it will still exist until, I suppose, we approach 2050 or 2060. But in relation to something like our automotive industry, where we export 60% of what we produce goes to the European Union and the United Kingdom, and where there are deadlines in those countries for the phase out of internal combustion engines, it is absolutely critical that we can adapt and we can retrain and we can retrofit our automotive industry so that we don't lose those markets, and we don't lose the markets, we don't lose the manufacturing capacity, and we don't lose the jobs that so many people in our country actually depend on. So I think there is a huge risk to the automotive value chain at the moment that we do need to deal with as a country. I think it is greatly welcome that there's an increased emphasis on hybrid vehicles, which is important for South Africa. And again, there's another intermediate measure that supports us. Honorable Bakti, in terms of the growing of opportunities for employment and the criteria and indicators that we look at, we can make that available to the Portfolio Committee. As we said, we are in a situation where we are going to be monitoring against a very comprehensive set of indicators and issuing reports on a quarterly basis, and then once a year an annual report of progress. And we are happy to report on that on a regular basis. One of the key indicators is really around growth in economic activity, the impact on livelihoods, the impact on skills, and the creation of new jobs. So I think that the socioeconomic indicators that you are talking to are ones that are very central in the work that we are doing. Then in terms of the justice issue, Honorable Nkosi, I think that the Eskom has done significant work firstly, I think there has been an incredible increase in the energy availability factor. The Eskom management board have done an amazing job over this year in order to protect the country and ensure that there is no load shedding. And Eskom has done significant work to be able to assess what it can and can't do with its fleet in order to ensure that there is no energy security deficit, that we don't go back into a load shedding thing. Hence their decision that they would delay closure of units and of coal stations in order to protect the country's energy security. So I think that for Eskom, the issues of ensuring that we have sufficient power to power the economy in the country is their top priority. And in the work that we do, we will be guided by the decisions that are then taken through the Ministry of Energy and Electricity and through Eskom. And what we are looking at is how do we support that? Eskom itself, as I understand, would want to build more renewables. And that I think they have a plan that really looks at the expansion of their fleet in a diversified way, and that really is how we're going to build energy security. In terms of the greatest opportunity for sustainable investment, Honorable Mofokeng, the Mpumalanga government is doing quite a lot of work on looking at sustainable looking at what is the best opportunities for economic diversification in the province. They are doing a lot of planning. I think that one of the important considerations is that in the coal belt, there is a workforce with great skill in industry, and also significant connection to the grid. So it would certainly seem that there is enormous potential for manufacturing. And I did mention earlier that the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan that is in the approval stage has looked in detail at the value chains in the renewable industry, where we have a competitive advantage in South Africa and where we could localize that production. And we would see guidance being taken in relation to investments from that work, and really look at how we could establish the incentives and the infrastructure, make available the infrastructure that would be enable us to ensure that there are further industrial jobs that are created in that area. There's also enormous potential in Mpumalanga in the agricultural sector, in the forestry sector, in the tourism sector. I mean, it is a part of our country with a resource base that really offers the way for very diverse economic opportunities. And in our work with Mpumalanga, we will be guided by the province, but I think that those are some of the areas that we have been looking at the moment. In relation, I've spoken to the automotive value chain part of our work, and then in relation to green hydrogen, this is an entirely new sector. So it is a sector that creates new jobs by definition and creates new skills, and would be able to bring that in particular into the Eastern Cape, the Northern Cape, and the Western Cape. And those three provinces are actually working together on being able to look at how their alignment can enable that economy to be able to get up and running quicker than it would otherwise. So they're looking to coordinate with each other very, very closely in ensuring that they take the best advantage of this as a completely new opportunity that would bring significant jobs into parts of the country where there are high levels of unemployment. So I think to conclude, before I hand over to Mr. Dix, we will be producing these regular update reports. We will be doing these deep dive evaluations, and that information will be available, and we would see ourselves engaging on an ongoing basis with the portfolio committee as this process and as this work moves forward. Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. I'll hand over to Mr. Dix.
Thank you, ma'am. Honourable Chair, perhaps just on some of the points, and perhaps just to give a framing before I respond to some of the outstanding issues that honourable members have raised. To add emphasis on the transition being managed at a pace that we can afford, and that doesn't put workers, ordinary communities, or our economy in a worse state, is fundamental. And that has been part of the principal emphasis that we've done over the last 3 years of managing this process. That the program around the just energy transition is not a program that must be determined or told or dependent on anything externally, that we've got to decide on how best and at the pace that we've got to do. The point about why this is important is because of the responsibility that we have around our carbon emissions. Now I think honourable members have thrown quite a bit around on the data, but we are one of the more intensive carbon emissions countries per capita. So the number of people versus the amount of carbon that we produce relative, for example, to China or to anywhere in the European Union is relatively high. And that's precisely because electricity production, which is largely coal-based, is 42% of our total emissions, right? So think about what makes up our total emissions. 42% of that is electricity based. So if we are able to transition and we're able to ensure a much better energy mix. And it's not only about renewables, it's including, Honorable Tring, it includes gas, it includes nuclear. I think it's quite important for us to understand that our energy mix in shifting away from high levels of carbon intensity is quite critical for us to show, and that allows to bring our carbon emissions down and allows for us to be able to move at the pace that we're in. So I think it's quite important. The second point that is the principle that is enshrined in this process, honorable members, and you will see that, and I thought Honorable Komani's point around communities, congratulating us about involving communities and workers, it is fundamental. And I thought Honorable Nkosi and others have made the point about the fact that it has to be just. So that's fundamental. That has to be there. Again, the just component is about ensuring that this is about a long-term transition, that we've got to take communities along, we've got to take workers along, we've got to find alternative. And I thought the point that Honorable Tring makes around Komati is a very important point, that I think there are hard lessons to be learned around the decommissioning of Komati. I think we've got to fix some facts and figures first, but certainly I think the impact of how we decommissioned it has been quite critical, and certainly some lessons that we've got to learn. So while Eskom was able to successfully redeploy its full-time staff, there's been a lot of criticism about contractors who simply have a different name on their overalls, right? Because they work for a contracting company, not full-time employed. And what happens to them? Equally, the 4,000 community members that live in Komati, what happens to them? What happens to the projects that are there? And there are important lessons to be learned that as we deal with the decommissioning, for instance, as Joanne had said, Honorable Chair, is that we got to think about a whole set of different approaches, front loading, for example. And I think it's quite critical for us to understand that when we talk about front loading is that we can't talk about decommissioning. So the point about it in a simple way, you can't decommission and then say to the community and workers, don't worry, we'll sort out the just transition afterwards. That cannot be the case. So we've got to think about how one deals with the just component upfront, and then as we ensure that workers, communities, investments are taking place, that we can move into transition, into decommissioning or repurposing. Which comes to my point around the coal and the coal value chain. I think honorable members do make an important point. It's an important part of our mining sector. It's quite critical. For export earnings, it's quite critical for, as Honorable Tring had said, 15 of our power stations are coal power stations. The decommissioning schedule or repurposing schedule is not on the basis of us shutting down because we are forced to. It is because, largely, as Joanne had said, many of these power stations have reached the end of life. Let me just use Komati as another example. Komati was decommissioned in 1987, by the way. We recommissioned it again in 2007 and 8, and that recommissioning was partly because of the load shedding crisis. The decommissioning schedule, for example, started way back before we had this bout of energy crisis. And correctly so, the minister was correctly stated that we can't be seeing to close down power stations when we're in an energy crisis. So that is correct, but I think the timing and sequencing was unfortunate. We corrected that, of course, Honorable Tring. I mean, what we did do is that the minister and government then took a decision that any power station that was in the integrated resource plan scheduled for decommissioning, and that, for example, included Ndrina, it included Grootvlei, for example, would not be decommissioned, that we delay that decommissioning, because it's illogical, as you put it, for us to agree, even if they have reached the end of life or close to end of life, close down the power station and create insecurity in energy. And for us, it impacts on growth as you see the numbers coming through. So certainly, I think it's quite important for us that the decommissioning schedule with the principle of moving at the pace and at the cost that we can afford is quite an important thing. And that's precisely how we got to deal with that. Honorable Paulson had spoken about the value chain. I don't have the exact figures, but I think the entire value chain probably has about 170,000 workers. Directly in the coal sector, it's about probably 70,000 workers. I've got to verify that, Honorable Paulson. So it's important for us to have consideration about this. Certainly, a large chunk of our coal will continue to be exported to the European Union, to Australia, to India, and China. So that will continue as long as these countries require for us to be able to export that coal. Power stations, as Joanne, are not going to be shut down because we're just forcing them to shut down because of we're shutting down because they're reaching the end of life. But many of our power stations will still continue to run through the 2030s, 2040s, and 2050. For example, both the two new power stations will continue to run up until 2050 and 2060, for example. And these are quite an important part of it. But our energy mix has to change. And as Honorable Tring says, China is simply replacing his existing coal stations. It builds probably 2 or 3 coal stations a week, if I understand, sometimes more a month. But if you look at the energy mix compared to ours, and this is quite an important fact that we've got to understand and why we have to push for significant investment in alternative technologies away from coal. So China, for example, its energy mix is that coal, gas, and nuclear makes up about 60% of the total generation capacity. More than 40% of that is renewables. Similarly, in the European Union, similarly in many other countries, even in the US. Us, 85% of our total energy mix is coal production. So I think it's important to understand that China, for example, still is the leading investment in renewable energy production as it is right now, the global leader by far. They talk about hundreds of gigawatts of renewable energy investments per annum. Interestingly, we're moving in the same direction, but not at the pace and scale, of course, as China, because it's vast and huge. But we are the leading investment in the continent on renewable energy, and we're driving the renewable energy growth in the continent. So it's important to understand that overall energy mix and why that transition is quite critical for us to understand. As the end of life nears for many of these power stations, we've got to have a greater energy mix. And it's not just about renewables, and I think that's quite important. Gas is going to play an important part of our transition, and in that, we're going to have to see that. So it's quite important for us to be able to see the continuation of it. Eventually, it will end. As Joanne said, China's made a clear decision. It will no longer fund any coal-powered power station outside of China. It will only build it locally, and many others will do the same thing, and we've got to do that. On the coal technology, abatement is quite important, but right now, I think, Honorable Paulson, what we do see is that the kind of abatement technology around clean coal is very small. It's it's not taken to scale. And so we've got to invest a lot more money and time and research into doing that. And of course, as, for example, energy technology has evolved over the years, similarly, that is expected to evolve. And at some point in time, we'll be able to have clean coal, if there is such a thing as clean coal technology. I certainly think it's going to be an important part of how we then produce our energy and mitigate against coal. Joanne had spoken about SARAM. Honorable Paulson, I think it's important for perhaps the portfolio committee to have the presentation of the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan. It is one of the better master plans that have been developed, quite significant around developing and building out the renewable energy sector, looking just not at PV units to be produced or mast or wind turbines, but the entire value chain. And that's quite an important part of getting the industry, unions, and government involved in quite an extensive investment into that. Honorable Tring, I think Joanne had covered much of what you had said. I thought I wanted to just correct some of the data in there. You're correct around the funding capital. Concessions or highly concessions are all debt that you've got to pay back. Why this becomes slightly more attractive is because we still have to pay for some parts of the transition if you want to compete in the global market, if you want to see ourselves transition into other forms of low carbon technology, that's going to be quite critical, or no forms of carbon technology that is there. The concessional and highly concessional is about the cost of capital. So if we go generally and raise the bonds on the bond market, they feel expensive. We're paying them at a rate considered prime. relative to the cost of capital that this would be offered. So you've got to think of the necessary trade-offs against that, and whether we would anyway have gone to the market, borrowed it for infrastructure, for transmission, for example, paid at a higher cost, versus getting this money at a highly concessional rate and probably maybe 3, 4, even 5% less. And I think that's really just the cost benefit that we've got to do. Certainly, where the cost of capital is much higher than what we would get on the open market when we have to borrow to pay for this, it doesn't make any sense. And some of the cost of capital in the JET plan that has been offered may be fairly expensive. And I thought it's important just to clarify that going forward. Honorable Bapti, I think we agree with you. Joanne has covered that we I think there's significant opportunities for growth in the renewable energy sector and other sectors of the economy. That's flagged out in the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan. And I do encourage perhaps Honorable Chair for the Commission members to request the DMRE and the Minister of Energy to bring the draft plan. As I understand, it has been approved by government. Honorable Komani, I hear you. I mean, I think that, you know, we present the presidency, and we've come here to present a conversation that has happened over many, many years, our engagements with different communities. You know, our intent was not here to undermine communities or anyone. I hope you can see through that. We are professional bureaucrats and public servants aimed at trying to address particularly a fundamental problem. But I think we hear the point that you make. Honorable Nkosi, can I convince you on the two issues? Don't see the Just Energy Transition Plan, both investment and the implementation plan, as a plan to resolve our energy crisis. Think of it more as a plan to try and address the decarbonization efforts that we're trying to do. We're not here to replace, for example, the integrated resource plan. And of course, as honorable members know, the Minister of Electricity and Energy would have to bring that revised plan. I do understand that on Friday he's making an announcement on that. So I think it's important, although we play an important role and would have to support and feed into the integrated resource plan, that integrated resource plan is fundamental in ensuring that we sustain long-term security, that it's quite clear on the technology that we must deploy in having that. And certainly, I think in the last version of that plan that was presented publicly, our interaction and engagements are going to be quite critical. This plan is not intended necessarily to undermine that plan. It cannot do that. It will be subservient to that. Neither is the plan intended to indicate around energy security. The energy security plan is the IRP, and you'd have to say a combination of what renewables, continuation of coal. It has to give an indication on decommissioning schedules. It has to indicate on gas, on nuclear, whether you know, we will be able to build new coal. Battery technology, for example, is going to be an important part. So we're all waiting for that, and I think that's an important part. This is not intended to do that. And then certainly, I think your point about the Just Energy Transition, I thought Joanne and we've got to put it to the test, because I am with you. I agree with you that where there are bad examples, like Honorable Tring talks about in Komati, we've got to show that where we put this to the test to convince that we're not putting workers and communities worse off, it has to be put to the practice, and we've got to get lessons learned to ensure that we can convince you that part of this is part of our growth paradigm. So this is part of our growth paradigm of industrialization, of building the economy, of getting investments going. It is not the be-all and end-all of growth. It is simply a part of it that is going to be a critical component going forward. Thank you, Honorable Mvana, and I'm really sorry for taking that long, but I thought it's important perhaps just to give a little bit more context and respond to all the questions and important and critical debates that have been raised. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dix and Joanne. Then can I check from the honorable members? Honorable Komani, is it a legacy hand or is it a new hand?
It is a new hand, my chair lady.
Okay, all right. Carry on. Okay.
Thank you very much, Mudula Stulu. We thanks very much for our presenters to at least try to articulate to our questions. Whereas there is somewhere where they explain themselves in order to answer our questions. And on some other stages, they are too much protective to themselves. We understand they are professional. That's why they send them here. There's nothing that forced them to explain their professionalism. The point is, we will like the word poor not being used because we know to whom it's referred to. It's no more a question, it's a direction. And then on the other thing, we appreciate them. I just only want to follow to Madame Joanne, that they say they are taking care of TVET colleges. We know in South Africa, we are tired of people who claiming other people's victories, that they only consider on the finishing line. They don't want to worry, where do that people come from? Where did that youth come from? People who really cares, they must go to the primary level and bring up their own people, not just to be shining with other people's trophy and then taking them and then thinking it might be theirs. The energy that they spend it to the wrong way or to the wrong platform. We are asking them to go to the primary level to bring up their people with their own formation that they want them to be like. Now they are intruders. They don't know how these people being prepared. They just come with their money because the money is too much. They say at the TVET college level, we are doing this and this. Where do that people come from? How do they raise until they come here? Who was busy with them bringing up to here? What was he or her suffering to bring them up here? If the government was having problems with bringing that people, you should have engaged with government from the lower level, and then whereby will bring proper and 100%. Now you are claiming the 50% of people in the TVET not properly trained. Now you want to claim the victory. You must never do that with us, please. And the other thing, of course, that you say you export, you are exporting 60%. It is going to be more. The 60% that you are talking about is going to be increased when some other coals are not going to be used. We are going to export, and immediately the percent is high. You must know that we are exporting the job of our children to other countries. Why can't we just make plans that when you come with your own invent that you are going to change the energy and have a plan of the energy that we were using before so that we can still consume it. And then the point of 60, let it be clear to us, is the percent, it's not the percent of the product we are sending out, it's the percent of work that should have been for our children we are sending out. I wish that we look at it. Maybe next time you come up with something. Then so let me thank you, Chairperson, and then thank them for articulating our questions. Let me stop there, not just to devote it the whole time. Thank you very much.
Honorable Mbata. Honorable Mbata, you are welcome. We heard that you were not well. Welcome back. Over to you, Honorable Mbata.
Can you hear me, Chair?
Yes, yes. Over
Okay.
to you.
Okay.
Welcome back.
Oh, thank you very much, Chairperson and honorable members. Good morning. I am interested in motivating for a visit to Komati. I have been speaking to activists there. What they've realized is that the projects that are currently being implemented to switch the opportunities for the community, they feel that they were done too late, or they feel that the switch could have happened automatically. By that, they prefer to have seen major alternative developments leading up to the green opportunities, keeping in line with the continuation of the station, at least until 2030, until some of these projects have been fully implemented, and then you create the switch. Because they now allege that they've been treated like guinea pigs for unemployment. They continue to suffer. They have entered the realm of unemployment, and they feel that the government has actually walked away with some of the timelines of some of the projects. Now, one of the worries, Chairperson, is that the skills of the worker community there was never audited. So whatever these new green opportunities that are coming up, they will not accommodate the worker population that was there, because they may not have the skills that are now necessary and the skills that are now needed. Now, the reality of this gap is that the switch happened too quickly without realizing the best interest of the community. The switch was mainly driven by government and the powers that be. Some of the community activists and the community members are even now alleging that the livelihoods have gone so low that majority of the community members now are having electricity switch off because they can't even afford to do prepaid anymore, because they used to be packaged in such a way that while they were working, they will not be switched off. Now they've been switched off because they're unemployed. And unfortunately, there is no one in between, Chairperson, to go back and actually assist them. The only people that are actually busy in the community now are new opportunity people who are just busy making plans for the future opportunities, but they are not actually addressing the current crisis and the pain of the community. And I think things should have been observed a little bit better on what could be the consequence, the immediate consequence, if you do not switch this community to some opportunity. The immediate consequence is suffering and unemployment, and suffering and unemployment, which could have been projected better by switching these opportunities together. When you light off coal, you should have light on the greener opportunity. And the last one, Chair, which I would like to share, is that there is also opportunities in the rail, moving from road to rail. We need to do that as early as possible. We need to create opportunities that will enlarge the portion of non-skilled persons to be the first one in line to benefit, and do not actually think about them as a last moment or as a last decision. And I think the opportunity for moving to rail from road can actually absorb a number of people that are currently on the unemployment line, because the skill ranges of the needs of those people that will be needed will be much more accommodative of the people that could be involved in the construction of rail. And the construction of rail does not mean we are constructing the new rail. It may also mean we are remobilizing the rail that has been unused and the rail that have not functioned economically for a longest while. It may also mean that we are reconnecting the communities towards those opportunities, and we are rebuilding those communities with new opportunities that will actually focus on the rail infrastructure being revived. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Mbata. Can we give over to Mr. Dex and also Joan?
Thank you, Honorable Chair, and thank you, Honorable Mbata. I'll respond to Komati, and I think that there is a great deal of what you are saying that we would agree with. Maybe to talk about where the process in Komati.
Excuse me, Joan. Can we request the person who has opened and unmute to please mute the mic?
Okay.
Over to you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. So maybe what I should do is to give a little bit of an update on Komati and where we are coming from and where the process is at the moment. I think that Komati, we agree, has not been a good example of a just transition. The Presidential Climate Change Commission has done an evaluation of what happened at Komati that is on their website, and it is a very useful document because it is based on very extensive interviews and engagements with the community, with the municipality, with Eskom, and with the councillors and a wide range of community members. And I think exactly as Mr. Mbata says, one needs to put the alternatives in place before one even thinks about closing down any units or any power stations. And I think that is the big lesson of Komati for any other area, is that until those alternatives are in place and until the community has been taken care of, that it is not acceptable to shut down. In the Komati case, the Eskom workers were all deployed to other power stations and to other jobs, but there's certainly the coal miners, the people in the informal sector, the people who sold food at the gates of the power station all did lose jobs, and the alternatives weren't in place at that point in time. Since then, what has happened is that there are a number of processes have been put in place. Eskom is doing a lot of work on alternative developments in the area, including repurposing and repowering and of in different ways that power station. The Presidential Climate Commission has, together with the Mpumalanga province, and together with the municipality in the area, and particularly with the ward councillor in that area, convened a community forum. And the community forum is now directing the course of development in that area, including looking at what is needed in the area in terms of both infrastructure, in terms of social services, and in terms of supporting employment creation activities. And there is now a plan in place, and some of those activities are starting to happen. We, from the project management unit, have fed into that process by supporting the process of fundraising for a number of these initiatives, including, given the amount of distress in that community, bringing in the Social Employment Fund to support the creation of employment. A lot of work has been done around things like the construction and improvement of early childhood development centers, food security issues in the community, support for students, etc. But that process, I think, has been quite important in terms of the way that the community forum and the ward councillor is now leading the process. So I think that this is not a good way. I think we would all agree that this has not been a good way to start a just transition, but I think through it there have been many learnings, and I think that the process that is underway at the moment is a very important and constructive process. I think in relation to the comments about road to rail, we would agree 100%. I think it is also in the ongoing operations of rail systems that you find jobs, but also in that construction process, and also huge spin-offs for things like the steel industry in the country, in terms of opening up and increasing the opportunity to both manufacture, so increased manufacturing jobs in the steel industry in order to be able to improve our rail infrastructure. And the same would go for the building out of the transmission grid as another area where you also start to build the construction industry, you start to build the steel industry, you start to build the forestry industry as well, in relation to what is needed in order for that to happen. So I think we do need to look at value chains, but I think that in general, the points that are made are appreciated. Yeah, and clear. Thank you very much, Honourable Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. It seems as if there are no other hands for now. Can we then check? Is there anything, Secretary?
If we are finished with this item, Chair, we have the minutes still to consider, Chair.
Okay. Let me thank the presenters and also the DDG for the presentation, and also it's not a closed thing. If we still have some other questions, we are free to write the questions via the secretary and then be addressed on those. Because when you are at home, you think about this presentation, sometimes other questions come up, then honorable members are also free to do that, but via the secretary. Thanks ever so much. You are being released till we meet again.
Thank you, Honourable Mvana, Chair, and Honourable
Thank you.
members.
Thank you, Honourable Mvana and Honourable members. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, bye, John.
Le sepeleng ga botse go ya ka kgoro ga se go tswana bakone. Tsela tshweu.
Okay, sure. Arigo. Yes.
Yes,
The
Chair.
minutes of the 13 November. How many sets of minutes?
Only this one, Chair.
Okay.
Yeah.
Please, can you lead us on this?
Okay, so these are the draft minutes of Wednesday, 13 November, where we had the update by the DMRE and the IPP office, as well as briefings by various associations in the renewable energy sector. Attendance register. Opening remarks, adoption of the agenda, presentations by the IPP office, presentations by the various associations. And then we've divided the discussions into the discussions 4.1 IPP office, 4.1, 4.2 discussions with the various associations, And then consideration and adoption of the minutes of 30 October. And then we've also had number 6, the announcement, and then adjournment, Chair. Those are the minutes of 30 November, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Secretary. Any corrections? Are there any corrections? Or are they a true reflection of what we discussed on the day? I remember it was a long, long meeting with many presentations. Okay, let me look at the honorable members.
Chair, I will move for the adoption.
Who's that?
Mr. Bapti, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Honorable Bapti. Any seconder to that?
Second adoption, Chairperson, thank you.
Okay,
Memo
Honorable
Mofokeng.
Mofokeng is seconding the adoption of the minutes. Thank you very much, Honorable Member. Is there anything, Secretary?
Yeah, just an announcement, Chair. So our next meeting is next week, Wednesday, the 27th. Just to indicate to members, just a reminder that that meeting is at 8 o'clock the morning, from 8 to 10, with the Minister of Electricity and Energy and the DMRE on the Integrated National Electrification Program, Chair. So 8 to 10 next week, Wednesday, the 27th of November. I don't know if you want me to
Physical
update
or
it's virtual, Chair. That meeting is virtual on the
virtual?
27th.
8 to
Yeah.
10.
Yeah,
Okay,
correct,
virtual
Chair.
meeting on the 27th. Okay?
Correct, Chair. Yeah, so then just to update members with regard to the oversight which we were planning for that week of 3 to 6, as I've indicated last week. Now, currently, as the parliamentary program stands, Chair, there's a sitting on the 3rd and there's a sitting on the 5th. So, but we are busy processing the meeting with Eskom. We want to schedule it on Wednesday, the 4th. Because currently on the parliamentary program, Wednesday, the 4th, there is nothing. There's no house sitting, nothing. So the plan is to schedule a physical meeting with Eskom at Parliament. I will send out the notices soon, Chair. So that is the plan. And the plan is to meet the whole day on Wednesday on those outstanding items, Chair. So that's an update from me, Chair, with regard to that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Secretary. And then I think the honorable members have taken notes on those announcements, because the reality of the matter, we have to meet Eskom before the end of the year. And there is no other way except to squeeze the 4th. And then that 8 to 10, we don't have a choice. It's better that it's gonna be virtual, so people can log on whilst they are at home, and then we'll see other things next year. Thank you very much, honorable members, by attending the meeting. Thank you very much, Secretary.
Chair.
Let's call it a day. Let's call
Chair.
it a day. The meeting has adjourned. Hello?
Chair, my apologies. Just a confirmation, maybe just two things. If Rico could send the changes, also forward those changes to us, so that we have a physical copy of what those changes look like. And then secondly, I just wanted to confirm then that our oversight from the 3rd to the 6th is no longer taking place.
Okay, no, he's going to do that, because it's really due to a parliamentary program. Otherwise, we were looking forward to do those oversight. But it doesn't mean that we can't do it first week of or beginning of the year. But
Correct.
that's it. We can check because we have to go to this and do the oversight on that. But we'll look at the slots and the programs of the parliament. This time around, they keep changing, changing the program. But we have to be flexible. Even when we adopted the program, we said we need to be flexible for that, for any changes that might come. So we always do it. Thanks, we will do it, Honorable. I see the hand of Honorable Bapti.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Dix did suggest that we have a presentation on SARIP, and I'd like to ask if it would be possible to fit it in this year, or do we wait until January?
Like, oh, the Dex, the one who has just said.
Yes, the renewable energy plan. The suggestion was that we should do a presentation on it because of its value and the detail it goes into. Currently, one of the plans are at a more advanced stage of development than the others. I thought it would be useful for us then to possibly include that in next week's meeting, unless you want to wait.
Okay, let's thank you very much, Honorable. I hear what you are saying, but let's allow the secretary to look at the schedule, because it's not only these meetings that we are having, only the ones of the chairs and etc. But I know I can't remember now the dates. So let's give that task to him, and then he will update us immediately he comes up. Thank you very much for raising that. Tatumbata. Honorable Mbata.
Chairperson, I am proposing that as part of our first visit, as we will be doing Mpumalanga, I am proposing that we do visit the community of Komati and hear the voices of communities there on what is happening really. Because I think we've been hearing much more on the department and other, I would say, public servants initiatives. But I think we need to hear what is really going on there.
Okay.
That's my proposal, Chairperson, as part of a package of visits from Mpumalanga. It's just a community a little bit away from everything else. So we may maybe add something like half a day.
Okay, let's even that one give it to secretary to look at it, because he will look at the program on the day that we'll visit and come back to us as the MENCO, and then we'll convey the message. What is the program? It is critical for to meet the communities in such areas of that nature. I agree with you, but let's give it to the secretary. We will look at the date and the time, and we will at least be able to look at this, what they have said right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The meeting has adjourned for the second time. We are done with this. We've taken note of all what you are concerned about, and also we look at it as MENCO and then come back to you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Meeting
Chairperson.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Bye.
Recording stopped.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members.
Cheers.